If you want your mind to be blown and your reality to shift, provided World War III doesn't happen, come with me May 8th through 19th to Egypt with Mohammed Ibrahim and Derek Olson. See you there. Hi, you guys. I'm here with Hugh Newman. He just wrote a new book called Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the world's first megaliths, and it's almost like a novella, but uh, it's a book completely dedicated to the region, like the Turkey region. Well, this particular building style, and it's really the first thing I've seen that's concise, that just really goes into these alone, and I think it's brilliant, and it's a really, really good read, and I think everybody should have, who's interested in megaliths, like, needs to have it on their bookshelf. So welcome aboard, Hugh.
Thanks a lot. How you doing?
Good. Okay, so you've been going back and forth to the, like, Göbekli Tepe area for how long now?
Yeah, about just 10 years or so, something like that. I started going there, I think in September 2013 was my first visit to that part of
So,
Turkey.
and you met Klaus Schmidt before he passed away, right?
Met Klaus Schmidt, and I was very lucky. The first ever visit I did was with Graham Hancock and Andrew Collins, so that was a bit of a treat. It's Graham's first visit as well, funnily enough, and he kind of came out and joined our tour. We'd done a tour back then, just the first one we did, and yeah, Graham was there, so that was an absolute delight. But this is before they built the big, massive roof on it as well, so it was an interesting time to go for sure.
Are you a fan of the roof or not?
Not particularly. No, I think it's a bit annoying. I mean, the new roof. I mean, back in 2013, they were building this horrific wooden structure, which was there for about 5 years, and that just blocked all the light. It just blocked the view of everything. It was horrific. And so they built this giant new roof designed by proper architects and things like this. And yeah, it protects the site, but also it blocks all the light coming through. It could have been done a lot better, I'm sure. And when we were there in 2018, they had a major leak and it was like chaos and it was actually damaging part of the site. And also, you get birds sitting on top of the parts of the roof and they're pooing on top of the site, which is a bit not of the best design and idea as well. But it is what it is. There's not one on Karahan Tepe at the minute, so that's good news. Although they are planning something there. But
What
yeah, it does
confuses
protect
me
it.
is, like, there's only a certain percentage that's dug up, so
Yeah.
it's kind of weird. It feels like when I look at videos, they've almost built like this, concrete path, and like they have everything so set in stone. But I'm kind of going like, you're kind of even building over stuff that isn't exactly 100% excavated yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of that there. Yeah, for sure. You can see that they built roads up to the site. They've actually got two other excavation areas, one that's got another roof on it, which no one's really allowed to go to, which is super frustrating. But it's I've seen photos and footage of it and things like this, and so they are kind of planning more excavation, it seems. I mean, they've done the LiDAR scans and like GPRs of the whole site, and it's remarkably large. There's like 20 plus enclosures, just at Göbekli Tepe, this is,
Mm.
whereas only what, four or five, maybe six have actually sort of been partly or mostly uncovered. So yeah, there's a lot to go at Göbekli Tepe. And must remember that's one of like at least 12 sites, possibly up to 20 or 30 sites in the whole region. That's named Tas Tepela, which means Stone Hills, the Stone Hills Project. So a lot more to come.
So, okay, when we're looking at these, like, enclosure D or enclosure C, or you're looking at these elliptical or circular type enclosures, would these have been like a little village, like, that are linked? Or are we talking about, like, we're looking at a cat, like a building, one building that was linked with like rooms that were linked into each other? I'm always kind of confused because when I'm looking at the floor plan of it, I don't it's so bizarre since it was intentionally buried to figure out like how the connection between the buildings would have actually gone.
Yeah, no, it's confusing for sure. Yeah, it's the same at Karahan Tepe actually, because they're all very close together. These are, like you say, they're kind of elliptical shape. Actually, I'd like to talk a bit about the geometry. There's actually a very sophisticated geometry linking up all the enclosures, and also the enclosures themselves have a very specific shape. but they do appear to be kind of very closely put together, like touching. That we know there were entrances, definitely to enclosure C, and we know there was almost like steps down going into enclosure D. It looks like that anyway. But so yeah, it's like really compacted around it. There's big walls and rubble built up around it as well, which was partly the fill. That's when it got filled in. Um, so it became kind of chaotic. But I think over time, initially it's probably quite spacious. There's probably just a few enclosures on the bedrock with, low walls, perhaps, like a bit like the front cover of the book. Then it got kind of more and more got built around it over like the 2,000 year period that was in use. And eventually you got to a point when there's lots of these kind of small square and rectangular buildings all around it. And Lee Clare, he's the current archaeologist there, one of them. He claims that his new research claims that it's kind of fallen in, it's kind of caved in a bit. Whereas Klaus Schmidt before that was saying it was deliberately covered. And I think it's actually a bit of both, because you can clearly see that they've repaired the site when it was like 10,000 years ago, and then covered it over, and they put things in place. They put the pillars upright in place and then filled
Okay.
it in. There's no way
Like, I
if it's
heard you
fallen.
mention that about the new statue, like, at Karahan Tepe. You said that it almost looks like it was broken way back when and then
Yeah.
covered. So, that's that's bizarre to me. Like, what do you think the motive, not that we would know, but what's your speculation of the motive why you would intentionally bury something like this?
Well, right, Göbekli Tepe, it's like they almost did like a repair job on it, then buried it, it seems. I mean, although enclosure C is pretty damaged, so we don't know if that was accidental or deliberate, and then it was covered over. So that's Göbekli Tepe. But in Karahan Tepe, we know, like pillar shrine or structure AB with all the kind of phallic monoliths and the stone head coming out the side, that was definitely deliberately filled in really carefully with different materials, and then big slabs on top. But the rest of the site looks like it was ritually damaged or decommissioned and broken, very specifically. It wasn't like it was just it fallen over and, it gone to rot kind of thing. And the same with this new statue found at the top of the hill at Karahan Tepe. It's broken in three parts, very specifically, but there's many statues, human statues, which are broken at the neck. So it's like some kind of head cult, we think, some kind of cult to do with that. Could also, we've got this new article, me and JJ look at the winter solstice, traditions that may have been prevalent there. And that's always a sign of death and rebirth, regeneration, that time of year. So, some later traditions, you have like the king or the leader being, sacrificed and a new king coming in and things like this. So that could be one of the things. They're breaking their kind of the human being and then putting another one in place. So there's that kind of thing to consider. It could be kind of ritualistic.
So what do you make of the well, okay, so there's the thing that okay, I'm just gonna get into this, even though it's like towards the end of your book, and I bet this is the thing I like the you call it the ancient geodesy or whatever, but the commonalities that exist. Like there's so like Gobekli Tepe has like the statues of like dudes holding their phallus, scarier or whatever you want to call it, their parts. It's like hello, and then there's so many things that looks like the in Indonesia's Valley statues do that. Like Easter Island has some statues that do that. There's a weird eh, commonality about it that's kind of bizarre. And then like even the H looks like kind of like the H block thing, or it just there's some stuff that like the way that they are depicting like the lizards or the snakes or whatever are very similarly depicted like in Peru. And so what do you make of all that?
Yeah, that is one of the most baffling aspects, I think, of these sites in southeast Turkey for sure. I mean, I think way back in 2014, I wrote an article about comparing Peru, the sites in Peru, with Göbekli Tepe specifically, notably Silistani and Kutimbo, which are around Lake Titicaca. These chulpa towers, these funerary towers made by the Koya people, which were like pre-Inca. They kind of used the same 3D relief carvings, almost identical, like the lizards, the snakes, which you get in Cusco as well, actually, the snakes, and also different animals like pumas there, but
Yeah.
leopards. in southeast Turkey. And so that I couldn't quite cope with how similar they were. Even Hancock put that in his
I like the
book.
stylization of the pumas or large cats, whatever I don't know what cat you want to say they are, but are very similar. That's like eerie.
I know it's odd, yeah, and also, but there's other things there as well. There's other similarities when you start reaching, that part of the world. The kind of standing statues, even the Tiwanaku type statues, like you said, the H blocks, all have similarities. So it's kind of odd. And then you mentioned Sulawesi in Indonesia. Yeah, I mean, again, this has been noted. They're almost like have the same abstract artistic form, or similar. With the hands touching the navel or the phallus, which we're finding a lot of that at Karahan Tepe, the kind of also the Earth of Man statue, where there's a lot of emphasis around the male fertility and the phallus and all this kind of stuff, which is like a bit shocking for some people, and it's actually caused a bit of a kind of a kind of controversy in Turkey, where the new statue, they actually initially announced it and it didn't have its phallus attached. It kind of was broken off. So
Oh.
and it caused this thing. So they had to put it back on and glue it back on. So I thought that was quite funny. But yeah, so there's a lot of this, fertility aspect, something me and JJ are like writing about at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I also, but okay, so we could get in. I don't know exactly know how we could get into the dating of everything. Like, how do they like? Okay, so walk us through what they're saying the dating is on, like, because Karahan Tipley is supposedly even older than Gobekli Tepe, and like the dates are getting pushed back, and so how do they know that? Is it just carbon dating from like what? How do they know these dates?
Yeah, it's proper carbon dating. That starts Göbekli Tepe. They got it to around 9,600 BC. This was with samples taken from some of the main enclosure D and C, for instance, under the walls, next to the T pillars, this kind of thing, bits of charcoal and organic matter, and it was like a few hundred years either side of 9,600 BC. I must hasten to add, and you can look at all the data. There's various places you can look at that. Which you come to carry, and they proved it when the fill was completed. They got samples from the fill, and then they proved they could date when it closed down as well, which is roughly just under 2,000 years later. Karahan Tepe, officially the dating is 9,400 BC to 8,200 BC. This is the kind of official. So it's a couple of hundred years kind of later generally than
Mm.
uh, Göbekli Tepe. But what they found at Karahan Tepe, which they haven't yet found at Göbekli Tepe, is evidence of occupation in that area. Now, there's no building at the time, but they found points, blades, arrowheads, and things like this of the hunter-gatherer people of the area on Karahan Tepe Hill, on the hill itself, on that and around that general zone. And so, but that doesn't, this means there could have been people just hanging out there and hunting and like, things like this. But no actual building, they think, took place till 9,400 BC onwards. So technically, if you're looking at the building of the sites,
Mhm.
Göbekli Tepe comes first, then Karahan Tepe. But there are other sites older as well.
Well, it's interesting because like I watched some video. It was mainly Andrew Collins going through on your channel the caves next to the Kirahan Tepe,
Yeah.
and it's I don't know how you would date that, right? Because it's just like basically carved into the bedrock. But that leads me into this whole okay, even if we're going with 100% go like 11,000 years ago is when this thing is built, give or take a couple hundred years, right? Um, they're not supposed to have metal. They're not even supposed to have copper chisels then and stuff. So how are they um having these elaborate relief sculptures that are awesome?
Yeah, tell me about it. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, the quality of the stonemasonry and the artistic design is astonishing, especially when you look at like the Göbekli Tepe enclosure C kind of critter or kind of leopard coming down the front of the pillar. It's in high relief. It's like 2 feet tall. It's huge. It's quite big. And it's perfect 3D relief. And you're just like, how did they carve away all that rock to leave that and the beautifully cut stone T pillar with it? And then you look at all the other ones and the statues and the artifacts. It is just astonishing. Apparently, they were using flint tools. They were using deer antlers and things like this. And because it's limestone, it's not like basalt, it's not like granite. You can work it, it's possible to work it. It's not like impossible. And And so they were just master masons, you know. But you mentioned the metal, right? Okay, they found copper at some of these sites. They've actually found metal. They found copper at Cheanu. They found it at a couple of other sites as well. Cheanu is about 8,500 BC, and that's further north. But so they've actually found natural copper kind of areas where they've used that and actually used that in kind of artifacts and various tools and things like this. So it wouldn't have been particularly strong copper. It's unlikely to have been used to carve the stone, but they did have it. They were working, you know, natural metal back then. So there is
That's
that as well. So there might be something missing that we're still yet to discover, which could give more clues
well,
as to
and
how
it's
they.
like in the cave, you could tell, I don't know how much of the cave is like that around Karahan Tepe is natural or dug in, but it's basically in the bedrock, it looks like. And they definitely squared off corners inside. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like it was just all natural cave. It looks like there were some enclosures that they carved out, and some of the corners have definitely been worked at some point. So you're kind of going like, well, how did they, or I don't, but we don't know when that was done exactly, but I don't know, it's kind of a, it's a really interest it's an interesting, when did this all happen and how did it all happen sort of mystery.
Yeah, I mean, well, the caves, yeah, they're fascinating. So this is like we did a recent video on this with Andrew actually, and the one you mentioned, and these are about just less than a mile northwest, really, of Karahan Tepe, on the same land, you know, and that's called Ketchley Tepe or Ketchley Hill, and actually. The original name of Karahan Tepe isn't Karahan Tepe. It's actually Ketchley Tepe. That's the original name of the actual site,
Mm.
an area. There's a sign up next to the farm. We've been visiting there since before it was ever excavated. We know the family. We should try and go up Ketchley Tepe and the main hill as well. And yeah, the caves up there are really fascinating because they're clearly carved out of the bedrock. They're not like there's not just they're probably partly natural, then they've expanded and increased them, but they're carving out of the bedrock as well up there. There's this like square rectangular shaped enclosure. There's also what looks like a grave up there. There's features where they carved these big holes in these blocks, placed them over these bell-shaped underground hypogeum chambers, which are probably used for water or grain storage and things like that. So there's a lot going on. But Andrew, you know, he's if you ever go anywhere with Andrew, you'll find that he's always looking on the ground, and he knows every single type of point and from which era it comes from, what blade, what flint, anything. He's kind of sort of mastered this kind of understanding. So he initially couldn't find many up there, but eventually he did when he started looking at different parts of the hill. So it's probably contemporary with Karahan Tepe. It's highly likely because there's so much, you know, that they wouldn't have just lived on one hill or ceremonies on one hill. There's a whole area around that.
And talk about like basically, I think some people think like, oh, there's just this one site, like Göbekli Tepe, and then oh, now there's a second site. But you're saying there's like a whole, this Golden Triangle region area has so much of this stuff that we're the Fertile Crescent that we're gonna
Yeah.
discover. That's like, whoa, they actually were more with it than we thought they were back then.
Yeah, well, officially there's 12 of these sites they're investigating. So we've got like the two main ones, obviously, but there's many others. I mean, we've been to a whole bunch of them, like Sefer Tepe. We managed to visit there. They started excavating. That's near Karahan Tepe, actually. There's a site called Harbet Zuvan, which is south, kind of south of Karahan Tepe as well. These are all in the Tek Mountains, very dry, arid place. There's also sites like more famous sites like Saybirch, which is remarkable. We've been there several times, got underground into some of the chambers there. And yeah, all across the region, there's actually the width of the region is about 125 miles. So we're talking a
Mm.
big area. But there's more than 12 sites. There's definitely more. I mean, a good late friend, Chuck from CF Apps YouTube channel, he was brilliant. He found at least 30 possible sites in the whole area. And so, thanks to him, there's a lot more, people realize there's a lot more going on than people realize, even though they're only focused on 12 of them. There's a whole bunch of sites on the further east, up on next to the Tigris River, some of them older than Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and some of them quite sophisticated as well. So this was like even during the Younger Dryas kind of thing. And so it's really interesting when you start looking around, and the influence is clearly much wider than people realize.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think it is actually. And then you mentioned I heard you briefly mention on another podcast that I think you said enclosure D had some magnetic properties, but you can't really see them now. But like, what magnetic properties? Like, wait, I was like, wait, what? That's interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
no, this was a gentleman called Paolo Derbertolis from the University of Trieste. I think that's how you say it. And this was back in like the 2000s. This is when Klaus Schmidt was around. He was doing stuff at the sites, probably in the mid 2000s. He produced a paper on it as well. It's online. You can look at it on academia.edu. And he's he was doing like acoustic research originally. He was doing some really interesting acoustic research, finding infrasound, finding different hertz frequencies, which were prevalent there, like you find at Newgrange and other archaeoacoustic sites, all around the world. Some of the chambers in Malta have this as well, the Hypogean, for instance. But he was finding the same thing inside enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe. But he also had magnetometer equipment there, and he thought, well, while I'm here, he did a bit more research, and he got all his magnetometers out, and from 4 or 5 different orientations and angles, just to double, triple, and quadruple check everything, he found that there was a spiraling magnetic field like next to pillar 18 in enclosure D. So pretty much the center of enclosure D. And he couldn't quite believe it, and he didn't know what to make of it. But he recorded all the data, got it all down, published it, and was hoping to go back and do more research. But unfortunately, Klaus Schmidt died, um, and the new archaeologists won't let him anywhere near it, and so that's the end of that. That's the end of that research, unfortunately. And hopefully, maybe he'll get back there one day. Maybe Neshmi Karal, who's kind of taken over the site, thankfully, from the previous archaeologist who was in between Klaus Schmidt and Neshmi Karal. Or maybe give him permission, or he can get more research done. But it kind of makes sense what, if you look at, the work of John Burke. Cliff Dunning's a big fan of John Burke and the Seed of Knowledge Stone of Plenty book he published in 2005. He traveled the world measuring the magnetism and electric charge at all these sites, and found it was a lot related to fertility and grain and seed enhancement. And so you think about Göbekli Tepe, this is where agriculture developed within 200 or so years of it being built. And so you have to kind of question, were they actually like utilizing and had somehow had an understanding of magnetism even back then, that they could use it and enhance and improve their chances of growing food, keeping the animals fertile, and actually using this energy for to push forward their kind of new culture they were developing back then.
yeah, and I wonder if you'll find magnetic anomalies at the other tepes. If it's going to be just like that's why they built it there.
Yeah, no, when you look at limestone, you look at limestone, and it's high in, like, in some places it's high in magnesium, which is electrically conductive. You've got manganese, you get it in some places as well. But the only issue with the area around, especially Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, there's no underground water. There's no water anywhere nearby. These are dry, arid areas deep into the earth. But they are near fault zones as well. That's the interesting thing. This is something else that John Burke analyzed and recorded. Many of the sites were on the edge or close to fault zones, and so that could again create this charge in the ground, like piezoelectric effects and things like this deep in the earth, which can have an effect on the surface. Um, and so there could be an element of that, but I've tried to look at the geology of the area, and it's kind of tough because it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. But there is talk about that there may be, an element of them understanding these energies, and only if, it's only really come out in one paper, unfortunately, so far. But I've been taking my magnetometer to all these sites hoping to get something, but you need time. You need to be there with it. I've got one of the tri-field ones I've had for a while, and you need to spend time there and do tests over days after day after day to kind of see if there's any changes. You can't just go there once, because it might
Right.
be your kind of phone doing something and you pick up something, so you have to kind of do it in a very controlled situation, which this Paolo Derbertolis did.
That's really when I heard that I was like, "Ooh, that's kind of interesting. That's juicy." Because yeah, like basically when I was in Belize back in this spring, I think I was there. I was in Belize in April, and this Jared Murphy guy had an idea to do basically he was like going to test the conductivity of the stones, right? So he had one of those like analog meters that test like electrical conductivity. And we were at oh, what was the name of that site? Anyway, we did it to a couple of different Mayan sites out there, and you could you could put you could put it on any stone that was part of one of the pyramids or part of any structure there, and it would go like up to like 50% or higher conductivity. And if you like put it on a stone that's just in the walking path or like that just was unrelated, zero conductivity. So whatever they were using like was super conductive, and I thought that that was kind of significant that we don't really I even like something I never even thought to test for conductivity within stones, but sometimes I'm wondering if that was that there was a technology that they had that we just do not know about.
Yeah,
And
I agree. I mean, you're talking about Mexico and Guatemala, all that area, Belize. There's some really interesting Olmec sites. You got the main Olmec sites up on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, but you got sites in southern Guatemala, like Monte Alto, La Democracia, and a few others, Abash Takalik, for instance. And they have kind of Olmec style statues, probably later Olmec kind of part of their culture, but they've got distinct magnetic properties, like in specific parts of the heads and the bodies, on the belly in some of them, which is interesting, but also in the temple area of the head
oh, interesting.
and major magnetic anomalies. So they understood magnetism back then. There's even a rudimentary compass that was found at San Lorenzo, the oldest Olmec site, goes back to 1700 BC. So they had an understanding of magnetism. They were using magnetic stones, they were using basalt, and these stones have a kind of natural orientation when they formed, when they hardened after being molten millions of years ago, whenever. And somehow the Olmecs understood that and would carve around this particular magnetic hotspot and leave it in a part of the statue on the belly or the temple and so forth. So if they had that understanding and they somehow sensed that, which I think it's what it's all about, it's about sense that the ancients, I believe, had a very high level of sensitivity to fluctuations and changes in magnetism and things like this, then it's quite possible that the Göbekli Tepe builders may have had that kind of subtle, feeling and understanding. When it comes to things like this, it's something we kind of overlook and we kind of ignore that in our society. We're bombarded with electromagnetic energies
Yeah.
constantly, so we can't really be sensitive to it. We're trying to block it out, if anything. And so it's like, I think there's definitely something about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it is interesting how it's found, and I mean, in a lot of these ancient sites, it's that like something related to that is found in a lot of them. So that's pretty cool. So okay, also like uh I'm really interested in I've been doing a lot of comparing all these different like you talk a little bit about the cut marks and the holes and then like the soul holes and the rock carved bowls. So that like they're almost like libation holes in Malta or like what do you make of all these? And apparently like there's a lot of even like the little pitted designs are found in some of these tepe things which are similar to, like they found that those like all over like Greece and I mean, which isn't that far regionally. So, but yeah, can you expand upon that a little bit? Like, what do you think of all those?
Yeah, 'cause you saw about the cut marks, right? And
Um,
mainly, and we talk about the hold stones as well in a bit, but yeah, for sure. But the cut marks that's something JJ's kind of done a lot of an analysis of actually. She's found you find them all over these sites. I mean, all over the bedrock, everywhere. You find them at unexcavated sites. We've found whole patches of them at places like Jan Lahoyak, which hasn't been excavated yet. At Yogan Birch, which hasn't been excavated yet. They're all over Göbekli Tepe, all over Karahan Tepe. They're in random places as well. They're just in the bedrock. They're inside enclosures. They're out in the countryside. They're on the edge of sites, but they're also notably they're on the tops of T pillars at Göbekli Tepe specifically, which is one of the only places they've survived. The tops of the T-pillars have survived intact so far, excavated anyway. So what's that all about? I mean, I mean, you find these everywhere. You find them in Britain, you
Yeah,
find
it's a
them all
stone.
across Europe, in megalithic sites. Sometimes they're not flat, which most of the ones we find in southeast Turkey are. They're not on flat ground or flat top pillars. They're in other countries, you find them on sides of things, angles carved out, and you're like, what the hell? But in tradition, according to JJ's research, I mean, she's been following and the work of Maria Gimbutas and the goddess traditions. They're often revered as like receptacles of the goddess, where water, sacred water, would be collected overnight, often dew water or rainwater sometimes, and then used in healing and ceremony and rituals and things like this. So there's that side of it. Other people say these cut marks were to kind of tune and alter the earth energies. This is David Cowan's written a book about this, how he thinks the cut marks of Scotland were designed for this purpose. So manipulating the energies we've just been talking about. Andrew believes they're like to place meat and offerings for carrion birds, like vultures, to come and eat the flesh of even humans, like excarnation rituals and things like this. Other people say they're for oils and sacraments to be placed to give to the earth as such, things like this. So there's different ideas, but I think the kind of the goddess thing makes sense, and the water thing, because water was a big deal at sites like this because there was no natural water
Yeah,
anywhere.
collecting water would have been.
Yeah, and like at other sites where there's more domestic, clear domestic dwelling, like Nivali Chori and Chiano, for instance, they, I don't remember seeing any cut marks there, because they've got their water coming in, they're sorted, they don't need to. Whereas here they were collecting little bits of water for ritual purposes, for little drinks and things like this. So I think there's an element of that.
They're even in when you go to Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, like on the bluffs above above like the main enclosures, there's what I get they just call them like pecking holes is what they call them, but there's like rounded out cup mark holes like on the cliffs like that overlook the pueblos, and they don't make any sense. They're just kind of like, wait, why are these carved into the rock
Yeah.
up here? It's weird.
Yeah, you get that. I mean, even at Karahan Tepe, you actually get like this in structure AA, which is like this another sunken pit. You have this kind of bench, and on the front of the bench, on the front face of it, you have half, serpent on half of it, and a canid or a fox on the other half.
Mm.
And on the flat top above the head of the fox or canid, you've got two large cut marks there. It's like, why are they specifically placed there? You also have very large prominent cut marks above a similar thing, a saybirch above the panel with the guy holding his phallus and the animals on it. Again, on top of that, you have two or three big cut marks. And it's like, well, what's that all about? Why are they there in that particular spot? There and at Karahan Tepe. So there's something significant about them. But we're kind of just clutching at straws, trying to look at other old traditions
Right.
to get an answer. And I think the Maria Gimbutas and JJ's, it makes a lot more sense than anything so far.
What about have you found anything with like nubs?
Nubs, not in this, not really. No, no, no.
Yeah.
I think this is a era before that kind of stuff started being built into sites. I think. I mean, you can argue that there are nubs because the 3D relief carvings, if they're on some of the pillars, you could say that
Right.
some of them were nubs, because if it's been worn down and there's a little bit left, for instance. So I don't think so. I mean, I might be corrected on this, but I don't think I've seen any at these sites. So, but again, so little has been excavated, so what else is there to come out of the ground? I think
What
that's
about
that's
like
one of the.
cart ruts? It seems like you guys have found at least a singular cart ruts, maybe not.
Yeah, again, it's kind of like a cut rut. I mean, I got kind of moaned at on my video. Some people commented on it about that because I was saying, "Oh, look, it's a cart rut," But no, I don't think they're like traditional cart ruts
Like
like you
multiple
find in
cart ruts.
Malta, like you find in Spain and other places. I think you're looking at that was for water. Feels like it was for water because it was leading down into one of these underground kind of bell-shaped chambers. This was on the northern hill of Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe. So I don't know about that, but also similar things have been found at Göbekli Tepe as well. And I've not been able to locate them. You're not allowed to go to a lot of part of Göbekli Tepe anymore, but there are bits going off a cliff face which look like cart ruts, which really surprised me when I saw them. But again, they could be water channels, and a bit of cliff could have come off. It could have been places to collect water there as well. But again, to me, generally, when it comes to things like nubs or polygonal walls or cart ruts, it feels like these are all from an era earlier
Or
than
that.
bit
Yeah.
earlier than it feels like they came a bit after, even though we're finding evidence of Malta being super ancient, like going back to almost the time of this era as well. But again, who knows what's going to be found? That's the question.
Yeah. But I mean, still, like the T-shaped pillar in and of itself is pretty common around places, which is bizarre. And yeah, and like the relief sculpture on everything is just like, whoa, crazy
Yeah,
cool.
it is
Yeah.
very cool
I
for that
mean,
era. Yeah.
so okay, you are offering 2 trips a year to Turkey, right? Like you guys
Yeah.
you're gonna keep that up?
Yeah, I don't see. Yeah, well, I mean, we need to go back to continue researching. So if we can do tours, trips out there and take people on the journey, it's brilliant for us because we get it enables us and it supports us in our research because we're like, really into this. We're
Mhm.
like 100% focused on this at the minute. And Andrew as well, he's got a book coming out next year. Me and JJ have got another one in the works. But yeah, we do tours in May and September. September one is more focused going into eastern Turkey, beyond Göbekli Tepe, going up to the whole Tigris, Garden of Eden area. Whereas the one in May, we visit loads of megalithic sites. Like we actually visit polygonal walls with nubs at Alaca and Hattusa and stuff like that. But also Cappadocia,
Yeah.
Çatalhöyük, Derinkuyu, all that kind of stuff. So we kind of mix it up. It gives us a bit of variety as well because we go back so often. But we often go back for the winter solstice as well. The last 2 years we've been there for the winter solstice. We're going to be going back next year for it as well. We're a bit tied up this year, unfortunately. But yeah, and that's when you can witness some really interesting phenomena, which we can
Yeah, so
obviously
talk
talk
a little bit
about.
about that. Like you guys seem to be really focused on the archaeoastrology alignments.
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff. I mean, there's been a few papers come out over the years. Andrew's done a lot of work on it. There's a gentleman from Italy who's done a study. He believes everything's to the south, looking at Sirius and Orion and stuff like that. Göbekli Tepe, this is. But when we went to Karahan Tepe in December 20th, 2021, a series of events and issues led us to be there first thing in the morning because they were going to close the site down that morning or afternoon. We got there for sunrise, fortunately, and we witnessed this light. Me and JJ Ainsworth, we witnessed this light come through the sunrise, come through this porthole stone, hitting the stone head on this side of the head. Yep, and then it moved. Then over 45 minutes, the light moved around the head, kind of finished in the neck. So this was clearly aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. It started like a few minutes after sunrise, lasted for this period of time. Clearly aligned, clearly marking this time of year. I mean, if you go into the statistical stuff, we're talking millions to one chance of that happening.
Mm.
It's just outrageous. There's such a small area of sky to come through, and actually, the porthole stone is when the sun's coming through it is at a really sharp angle, so it's coming through like this much,
Okay.
that kind of much light. So it's very specific. And you mentioned Chaco Canyon earlier, for instance. There's I think it's
Yeah.
what Fajita Butt or something. There's an area near there where they have these leaning stones over this spiral, and on the winter solstice, the light comes through and frames the spiral in these blades of light. Whereas the summer solstice, it hits the middle of it. So that was like a rudimentary kind of
Yeah, that was kind of like
exercise.
their calendar where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
this is the peak of yeah,
So
this,
is this
yeah.
at Karahan Tepe. It feels like it's specifically marking this particular point of the year, which is coming up. It's a very, very important time of year for many, many different reasons. In fact, I've got an article that's been published on ancient-origins.net about this site and several other sites and the winter solstice looking at why it's all so important, and the fact you can actually visit some of these sites, still see the phenomenon. That's what I mean. That's what's amazing. You still see the phenomenon today at Karahan Tepe, even though it's 11,400 years later. And this is because the sun has only moved a degree or a degree and a half from where it was rising back then. And so back then it would have actually been a better illumination of the head. It would have been aligned slightly better because it'd be slightly further to the south on the horizon, or towards the right on the horizon. So it would have been a much better, but it still works today. And this is what blew our minds, because it's like,
But wouldn't
oh,
it have had a roof on it back then?
no, no, there's no evidence of any roofs. No, the smaller enclosures maybe, yeah, but no, we've actually done some analysis with a graphic artist, 3D graphic artist, regarding the roof, because a lot of people trying to push this idea of a roof, and it's interesting, but there's zero evidence for any roofs, unfortunately, so far. Maybe on the smaller enclosure it makes sense, but the large enclosures, no, there's no wood's being found, and no wood grows anywhere nearby either, unfortunately. But we did some analysis with this Kevin Esslinger gentleman, who's brilliant, working with him closely, and he put a roof on it and experimented how it would be, and found that even with a roof, if you just did it in the most obvious way, the light could still come through and illuminate through the central pillars, through
Right.
the whole stone, and illuminate the stone head accurately without any interference from the roof or the beams. So that was really interesting. That really got me. And our buddy Matt Simpson from Ancient Architects has been working with him as well. And even he wrote me an email and said, okay, I think there's a kind of a balance here between the roof and the solstice. It seems like it can work, even if there
Like it would
wasn't.
have to be fully enclosed on the sides for it not to work, basically.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the problem is, it's like the experiments that Kevin did, and I've been working with him on this. If you put a roof over the whole thing, it's pitch black, and you can't see anything. So you're not gonna.
Right.
You need light coming through. And if you look at the traditional build, this is what Kevin came up. If you look at the traditional buildings of even the kivas in, like, the southwest of the United States, they have openings, for certain times a year to observe the stars. But the problem is, you look at all the symbolism at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, of all the carvings, it's all sky symbolism. It's not like, so I personally believe there wasn't a roof on the main enclosures. There was roofs on the smaller enclosures. Even the pillar shrine could have had a roof. That would make no difference to the alignment, because it's coming through a whole stone, which is below the roof level anyway. So it'd actually be better if you're inside it, because you'd be pitch black, and then the light would be like this mind-blowing experience. So there's a lot of debate about this, but if they find evidence of roofs, I'll be fascinated. But until then, we believe that they were watching the sky from these places, because all the symbolism, all the alignments which are now coming out, suggests that they were star watchers. This is kind of like, it's the obvious thing that they were doing.
I like it. Okay, so tell us about why this is a good time to go to Turkey, because even
It's a
though,
good, yeah. It's
you
oh,
know,
it's a good time. Yeah, the next few years are kind of critical, really, because this is, you imagine, right? I say this to everyone. I get all excited when I talk about it. But you imagine you're going to Egypt in like the 17, 1800s. You're going to the Maya lands in the 15, 1600s, whatever. You're going to investigate the mound cultures at the same time. You're going down to Peru, when all these sites are being discovered. This is what's happening in Southeast Turkey now. Stuff is being uncovered. Now, it's not like things are going to be in really bad ruin, because they've been all buried. These sites, they've been completely buried carefully. Now, people still debate this, but you can see that sites, they've been preserved. So they preserved themselves by being buried. So now this is the first time many of these are coming to light. So I think it's going to blow people's minds over and over again, what is going to come out of the ground in the next few years. So we're really lucky. So we go to these sites when excavations are taking place. We go during the summer and autumn months. This is when it's happening. So you can actually see things as they've just come. I mean, I was at a site recently, and I saw a skeleton inside one of these Temple sites. I was like, what the hell? This is major. And there's no one around. I just looked over, and there it was. I was like, what the hell? And so you see stuff. We saw a stone, right? We went there one week. This is at Sayburch. This huge U-shaped stone. It's like 6 feet wide. It's like 20-ton block or something. Beautifully carved with holes in it and things like this. And one week we went there and it was still half covered up and we were excited then. Luckily, we thought we'd just pop back in there the week later at the end of the tour and it was completely uncovered. And we're like, whoa. So we got some really cool photos and a
That's
3D
cool. Like kind
scan.
of like the first to see that.
Yeah, and like no one's kind of seen it, and I guarantee they're going to cover it up and bury it again because it's like I don't know what to do
What
with
do you
half
do
the
with it?
stuff they find. And so there's like you get a chance when you come on our trips to actually like see stuff as it's happening, and we're quite friendly with many of the families, and we have good contacts out there now. So we get access to things. We're very respectful. We don't take anything. We don't touch anything. We don't walk on anything we're not supposed to. We're very, that they're watching us basically. Me and Andrew, especially, they kind of we kept an eye on in that part of the world, shall we say?
Right. Yeah. So, okay, give us your most woo, like who built it? Like, give me the story of like what you think happened. Like, and I don't care. It's just speculation. You think giants were involved because I know you're a big giant guy. Like, and it is interesting. It's like the new sculpture is like 7 and something feet tall. It's just like, so who do you think these people were, and how it feels like there's not a continuality, right? It's like they were, and then I don't know, they buried everything up and they left or something. So what's your story about, like, what do you think is happening here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's really hard to answer. I've got to be honest with you. That's all you can say is all you can do is look at everything that's been found and like try and just like build a picture from there. And this is kind of like, one of the things that fascinates me is when you start looking at things like these old texts, like the Book of Enoch, even the Bible, the Old Testament. Um, you look at like the kind of some of the traditional stories from that part of the world, like the Armenian version of the biblical stories and things like this, and lots of it, you're like, oh, actually, they're kind of referring back to this time and so it feels like it's you got like the Watchers of the Book of Enoch or the Anunnaki of Sumerian tradition. It seems like it was them. I mean, I've got to be honest with you. I mean, it sounds a bit kind of easy answer, but that's what it feels like because you look at one example. Yeah, we go into actually this in our late an article we've done for Graham Hancock's website about all the fertility and traditions of the winter solstice at Karahan Tepe. It's up on there now, and we believe you look in the Sumerian stories, and it clearly states over and over again in all the different translations that they founded a place called the Dooku Mound, which actually Klaus Schmidt believed was Göbekli Tepe, and they built structures below the Dooku Mound, made of wood and stone. And then, after they kind of got everything in place, after they devised calendars, like at Karahan Tepe, they then started growing food and domesticating animals. So this is like in the Sumerian stories, but talking about an earlier epoch, the time of the gods, the Anunnaki, the seven sages, not the time of the Sumerians, I believe. And then you look at the actual reality of this, and now it's over and over again, it's been proven that this is kind of true. They built the sites and then they developed agriculture within a few hundred years. So, and animal domestication. So it's the same thing, but kind of written down by the Sumerians and proven now by scientists and archaeologists of the area. So that alone is fascinating. Then you have the story of the Book of Enoch and the whole story of Uriel taking Enoch off to all these different places. And one of the things they talk about is going off to measure, taking cords, going off to measure. And this fascinated me, and to measure all the corners of the world and things like this, going to these different latitudes, flying there strangely, which could go into ancient aliens territory immediately, but actually kind of measuring and building according to these sacred measurements. You look at the so-called watchers or the angels of the Book of Enoch, they have all these different skills, like astronomy, like agriculture, metallurgy, measuring, geometry, science, mathematics, all this kind of stuff. So then you come back to Göbekli Tepe, and this is another area of research I'm getting deep into. You suddenly, we did a lot of analysis on this, and there's a little bit done by some researchers and scientists already, but I'm finding remarkable and sophisticated geometries and ancient measurement systems within these sites to such a high level that this is where all the ideas from Egypt and Stonehenge and everywhere else must have come from. Because and so then it makes you think, well, is the Book of Enoch talking about the people who built Göbekli Tepe as having these skills that can only be explained by analyzing and decoding what's at these sites? And I think that might be the best answer I can give currently.
Yeah, it's like you know, they could be the Atlantis in some kind of way. Like they could be the older. I mean, they are
Yeah.
technically right now the oldest um what
Sort of
culture?
Yeah,
Advanced culture.
civilization, yeah, for sure. I mean, and they do have elements of civilization. I call it a super civilization. It's such a vast, ridiculously sophisticated area at such an early time. But yeah, I mean, we can also mention the fact that there's actual people have done some less speculative ideas, but that where there's actual DNA evidence of the Natufians and the link with the Levant and Israel and Palestine, all that kind of area,
Mhm.
Lebanon. The sites coming out of there, which are as old or older in some cases, and sophisticated stonework and alignments and things. But also there's different ideas. I know Andrew's a big fan of the kind of Siberian migration coming south. I mentioned all these in the little book as well, and also ideas of coming in from different parts of Europe, from the Paleolithic Europe, like France, Germany, and other places. And it may be a kind of amalgamation of different people which triggered this huge innovation and change in thought. But there might have been other things involved. We just don't know.
Very cool. Well, I enjoyed the book. I thought it was really cool, and I think everybody should do it. And I also think people need to go on your tours because you sound like the person to go to Turkey with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, people are most welcome. I mean, yeah, I love it out there. It's just a home from home, really. We're out there quite a bit, to be honest with you. But yeah, we've got some beautiful contacts out there. And it's just, as I say, it's this time of exploration, this time of discovery, which is to me super exciting because stuff's happening now.
That's awesome. And you also tell them about your conference that you do every May.
Yeah, we do the big Megalithomania conference in Glastonbury, England. It's the kind of super cool hippie town of the southwest. Tons of ancient sites nearby, and we do like a 2-day conference, and then loads of talks, and then we do like 4 to 3.5 days of tours as well, to like Avebury and
Okay.
Glastonbury. I think we're going to Wales this time, South Wales, to look at some megalithic chambers and dolmens. And yeah, we have a great time. I mean, it's the best place to hang out for like 4 or 5 days is Glastonbury for sure. I think it's the 4th and 5th of May in 2024.
Well, that sounds awesome. I'm gonna try to make it this year. But okay, so is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would want to maybe cover?
Well, I think one of the things that is fascinating to me, and I think it's fascinating to quite a few people, and this is a kind of a big thing that's been coming out, and we talked about it last time as well, is the fact that we have evidence of them brewing beer. Okay, and I'm not saying that because I'm a big fan of beer, but they also have evidence now that they may have been ingesting psychotropic plants as well. We get that from Rakachek Cave down in Israel from like 13 or 40,000 years ago. They were producing ergot was growing on their barley. There's things like this. There's also mushroom symbolism and things like this. So I think that was part of the innovation and explosion of ideas, and also it may explain the abstract artistic qualities that came out of that area. That they were bringing all these people were bringing their sacraments to this one area at this one time, just after the end of the Younger Dryas, just when the weather started improving, and realizing we have to now bring everything we've learned from all these cultures. We're now going to stop, so we have to put all the information and knowledge and wisdom into these sites through symbolism, through the measurements, the geometry, and everything we can think of, and have it as a kind of teaching innovation area. And I believe that there was a combination of different ideas, different innovations coming in, but also enhancing consciousness. And I think this was one of the jumps that we have in like human evolution, if you like, took place at this time and triggered a change on the planet. And the influence is still being felt in some places today. And it can be seen at many of the other sites that people have been looking at.
With the help of psychedelics. Which actually that actually does make a lot of sense though. But I mean, and it does seem to be where people were stationary and were creating basically art. So that's pretty advanced there. So that's it's very significant. But yeah, so this has been super awesome, Hugh. I've loved having you on. I've loved learning about it. I highly recommend the book. And yeah, we'll have you on again soon.
All right, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, cool. Bye.